Hi, we have a toaster.
I woke up this morning and was being lazy in bed because my cat was being a demon. And my first reaction was to look at my phone. And I out loud was like, should I do the podcast today? And Brewing came into the bedroom and was like, stop being lazy and go talk to your friends. So I'm here now.
So he's talking to his friends.
We're his
And Milo
friends.
is not a demon.
It's on a
Milo is
record.
not a demon.
As of December 15th, we are still friends. Put that on the drama wiki next year.
Milo is a demon. Put that on the drama wiki. He is a little imp from hell.
That is my favorite ongoing gag that isn't a gag. Is just the number of times you're like, Milo, no. And then you're like, your voice like digitizes or something and disappears. And then like we wait 5 minutes for Discord to time you out. You're like, oh, he's
I literally had something similar where I kept coming back to my computer. So I'd walk away, go do something else with my life, come back, and my computer kept being off. And I was like, what the fuck's happening?
Oh.
So I thought there was a problem. And I realized, like, I just sat and I watched it. Like, I walked away and I watched it. And I watched one of the cats jump onto my chair, jump onto my desk, walk directly onto the power button for the computer, and then walk over to the window. Like, just with a fluid motion. So I had to go and 3D print a little bump over the button so that way the cat can't
step on it.
Button.
Yeah.
It's just, cats just don't give a shit, dude. They'd walk over your corpse if it meant getting to whatever they wanted to. They don't care.
They like the satisfying little pop.
I got the pleasure of meeting Milo briefly while I was in California for a little bit, and he's an angel. I disagree vehemently with Toaster's assessment of his.
Because you're getting the Milo's is very friendly to all incoming guests experience as opposed to other cats that hide under beds, and you're not getting the having to live in the space of a constantly moving cat that's looking for fun every second that you're doing something in an office.
The thing is, I was musing to Kat, I think it was, about I kind of want a cat, but I can't because I travel every once in a while, and it's just like it's a pain to get the cat to a hotel or whatever. And then he was just, no, you should get one. And then when I arrived, one of the first things, like a few weeks later, I got myself a black cat who is a demon as well. Very adorable, but he's also he wants to fight everything. So now my studio is covered in cardboard because like, for example, behind my desk he can't go in there, so cardboard covers to prevent him from going back there. My guitar rack, cardboard around it. The thing where I keep the driving pedals as well, he wants to fight all of the cables in my steering wheel. Yes, I can't. And like I used to have behind my bed, I used to have sort of the what are the little light, like bedside lights. They had their cables hanging into like the socket in the wall, just hanging, and now I have to have like proper channels for them, those things that stick to the wall, so otherwise the cat doesn't electrocute himself or whatever, because he just bites. But Milo is an angel, and so it's incorrect what Toaster is saying.
Colonel says Milo is an angel, but Colonel did not live my life this morning, which was waking up at 3 a.m. as Milo rocketed across the house and decided to run across the bed, jumping directly onto me. And then me waking up at 5 a.m. to Milo reaching down from my headboard and grabbing my face with his claws and trying to turn me over so that he could see me. And he didn't, and Colonel didn't get to live through 8 a.m. me waking up to Milo just going, blah, 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 because he's learned that he can communicate now to get me to fill his food. So he talks now to get his food, and he just screams into my face until I get up in the morning to feed him. So that's why I'm up. That's why I'm up early.
I kind of lived a little bit of that, apart from the whole bedboard assault on your face.
He's a nightmare. I love him to death, but he's my weird little ADHD son is just running around the house being a demon.
Yep. I can confirm. Cats do that. You should get a third cat.
I have 3 cats.
Oh, you have 3 cats? I also have 2. I think.
Yeah, you guys only met 2 because one of them just like doesn't like people and just stayed in my bedroom. But yeah.
The normal thing that happens when you visit cats. They fucking vanish. They don't like...
Not all cats.
A lot of cats just do not like strange new people walking into the building.
Yeah, I mean, most animals reasonably have anxiety about strangers, which is good. You don't want your animals just being friendly to a bunch of random people. It's not good for you.
I mean, dogs.
Well, cats are fine.
Most people's dogs love guests. Like, oh my god,
which is a problem. You're not training your dog well. Your dog should at least be somewhat like, I don't know, stoic at the sight of new people.
You didn't train your dog well then.
No, I didn't. It's not my dog. I didn't train the fucking thing. It's not my dog. I haven't trained a single animal. I don't want to. I don't have any interest
visiting
in
your last apartment, or I don't know which apartment, how to count how many apartments you have moved a lot.
Yeah.
When I brought you the Berserk display,
computer.
Shadow was losing his goddamn fucking mind.
Yeah. Shadow loves company. He loves people. He loves to be interacted with and looked at and pet and told he's great. Very emotionally needy dog. But again, not my decision. Did not train that dog to be that way. And I think at this point, it would be rude to tell it to change
make
its
him
behavior.
stop. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like telling it to lose its personality, which is like, I don't care. It's not an inconvenience. It's just not ideal. But
speaking of not ideal, Astro Bot.
Oh.
Astro Bot.
What is not ideal about Astro Bot? What the fuck?
Astro Bot
what kind of segue was that? What the
is
fuck?
the ideal.
Transition is when I yell random words.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You could do that. It's fine.
You did that.
You did. You technically did do that.
Yeah. No, I'm saying this because before, in the podcast, we were just chatting about Astro Bot, and Toaster was musing about not having played. Toaster, when was the last 3D platformer that you played to completion before Astro Bot?
Oh man,
you completed during a blurry platformer.
What was the last 3D platformer I played? It would be on the channel. So let me look at my
cross promotion. Check out Toaster's YouTube channel with the stuff and the things.
YouTube.com/@toastedringtail to watch all my VODs.
Up Late with Panzer Dragoon. I know you didn't statistically.
Yeah, Up Late with Zone of the Enders also is just dead.
He made a video
no
essay
one watched it.
That
I mean, two.
It was a great video essay. I recommend.
The new video essay did not. I'm not really awake yet. Doesn't really work. Most episodes of this podcast get like several times more viewership than his last video essay. So you guys right now need to go watch the fucking video.
Well,
yeah,
that's right. Link somewhere that's easy for them.
Fans, you don't even know about Toaster's video essay channel. God, get with it.
It's called Up Late with Toaster. You can watch all my weird
you have to watch
video essay review things there. It's very chill. If you like listening to me talk about games, you can watch stuff there.
It is extremely themed. Like he has a full aesthetic setup of like a 3D modeled room and everything. I think didn't Andrew do all that? Good.
Yeah, courtesy of Andrew doing my technical art.
So
for the
half the
videos.
podcast worked on this, not me. I didn't do shit. But Andrew like made a whole fucking 3D little room for this like series to take place in. And, like it's all so you get to see it all themed within that location. And it's all cool from that perspective.
Yeah,
it's cozy.
It's fun. It's a fun thing that I do. And by fun, I mean an exorbitant amount of work for extremely little return. That channel hasn't gotten enough subscribers, so I'm not even monetized on it yet. That's how low the viewership is. But that's fine. This isn't about. I'm not going to complain about that. The last 3D platformer I played, I haven't. Technically, Astro Bot is the first straight up 3D platformer I've played for my channel. So the last one I played before it was probably Super Mario Odyssey, maybe when it came out on the Switch.
That checks out.
And you were bad mouthing.
You were bad mouthing one I played. Platformers.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of was bad mouthing 3D platformers. I wouldn't say 100%. I mean, if there are games that you could count as a 3D platformer in here because they're very movement oriented, but like I wouldn't like Pseudo Regalia, like was the last platformy game I played.
Literally 3D, literally platformer.
Yeah, but the thing is it's actually a Metroidvania, so
Those aren't platformers.
They're not. They're Metroidvanias. But Pseudo Regalia would be the thing that I played before that, and that was very, very high up my game of the year list. I think it was my number 4 last year. So I've played platformers recently. Just not. I mean, I'm sure there's more that I played. If I looked at my list of things from like right before I started my channel, there would probably be a few things in there, but Astro Bot is just stellar, just an incredible video game. I liked it so much that I played it entirely in a single week, and I 100%ed it and the free tech demo Astro Bot game that they sent out with the PS5, which is absolutely worth playing because it's like 6 more hours of Astro Bot. It's really good. Astro Bot is a fantastic video game. It feels extremely clever. It uses its very, very small set of mechanics in extremely interesting ways. And despite being like an IP explosion where the entire point is to go through like Sony history, not even Sony history, it's really just gaming history because like 90% of the IP in it isn't owned by Sony. I was very worried that a lot of the levels would just be throwbacks to old games that like don't do anything with their ideas. But surprisingly, most of the levels that feature like heavy throwback elements to previous games or like themed around other games actively explore the themes and innovate on the gameplay of the games that they are like paying homage to for the most part, which is crazy. Like it's so interesting. So highly recommended. Hot off, it's the Game Awards Game of the Year win. Astro Bot for PS5, 100% worth playing.
Spoilers.
Oh,
Spoilers.
How is that a spoiler?
Because I was musing about how, you know, it must be really good because it's better than Silent Hill 2 remake. Although it would be kind of interesting to see a remake be the Game of the Year. But I mean, I've watched. Go ahead. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say its literal competition was DLC. That's like pretty much the only other thing that possibly could have won was DLC.
Yeah, but I think even the Elden Ring DLC wasn't necessarily as well received as not that it matters for what Game of the Year is, but it does also matter. It is kind of a popularity award, but I think it'd be fine for Elden Ring or for a DLC like.
Well, like I think one of the very first Game of the Game Awards, one of the very first Game of the Year wins went to Witcher 3 Blood and Wine, which was also a DLC.
I remember that. Yeah.
But I think wasn't the argument that like, well, technically Witcher 3 couldn't have been like nominated for Game Awards because it didn't exist yet. So
exactly,
like a de facto way of giving it Game of the Year that it deserved or something.
Yeah,
but I think
so.
Either way, Elden Ring DLC is like enough to qualify as its own thing. And
what a short-lived institution.
The
Game Awards
it's also not legitimate.
So it's 10 years. It's 10 years old. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, the first Game Awards was 2013, I think.
It's just a fun little thing. Just a fun.
There are a few.
Silent Hill 2 has the acting is just so surprising.
And the performances are incredible.
It is. I mean, it's not surprising that it's good. It is just good in ways that are very surprising.
It's good in ways that you don't see in video game performances very often.
Incredible, yeah. I was literally, my mouth was open a lot, over and over again on different cutscenes, just watching. Your Let's Play in particular, and it's absurd how good it is, and it gels so well with the kind of game that it is. I'm so happy for people who haven't played Silent Hill 2 originally and just get to play it now, and because it is.
Yeah. It's a stunning remake. I mean, my top 3 for this year was really tough. We don't need to get super deep into it because I'm sure we'll have a podcast dedicated to our games of the year and stuff. But this year was actually a surprisingly very, very good year for games, despite there not being many major big releases that a lot of mainstream audiences played. But Silent Hill 2 remake was amazing. Lorelei and the Laser Eyes was amazing. And Astro Bot I feel like it came out of nowhere and just batted the most perfect run of all time in order to just steal everyone's hearts. It's just a really, really great game. So I think
on the PS5. Is there a way we can just not have it there?
Maybe Sony will release it on Steam sometime. I mean,
which
maybe
I wouldn't count on it. But also, I bought a PS5 because I gave up on Sony actually ever doing proper service to PC players, particularly in regards to Demon's Souls and the other one, the Bloodborne. Mm-hmm. So I don't think. I mean, it's gonna
Astro Bot is a virtually unprecedented thing happening spontaneously.
Yeah,
you say that, but I think it's like something like 70% of Sony's exclusives from this past generation are now on PC. So they're supporting it. It's just they're being stingy about Demon's Souls and Bloodborne.
Yeah, but also there are some exclusives that are console sellers because they represent a genre.
Yeah,
it's like Gran Turismo 7, for example.
Yes, exactly.
That they matter a lot more than just, I think even Demon's Souls, it wouldn't matter too much if they sold it on PC.
Yeah, 100%.
So in regards to that, actually, you were saying that Astro Bot is the first 3D platform in a while that you played that feels like every level or every mechanic is explored to its fullest every level, or how were you putting it?
So like the way that Astro Bot works is there's a bunch of different planets that you go to, kind of Super Mario Galaxy style, but each planet is themed, and you'll either get a different power up there, or there will be different platforming or thematic challenges based on the characters that are in the level. And there's like 6 major galaxies you go to or something like that, and each galaxy has like 10 planets in it. And then there's like secret challenges that kind of push everything. So the game just like really takes its relatively small move set and just pushes those mechanics to their absolute fullest in order to like explore every possible thing that they could do with it. It's super great. It's really it's just the first time I've played a 3D platformer in that I can remember in recent history where I was like, wow, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's leaving anything on the table. That was like a big issue that I had with Super Mario Odyssey, is that I felt like the game never actually stresses its mechanics until you get to like the reverse moons or whatever, like the really end game challenges. And then even then it doesn't feel like the game like really requires mastery. Astro Bot doing some of those hidden galaxies is what they're called, was absolutely like controller snappingly difficult halfway through the game. Like, so not that being hard makes it a good game, but it was a good example of a platformer like kind of really trusting an audience and being like, well, we trust you to be good at the mechanics and to pick up what we're doing and see kind of how we're playing with things. And it was just very it was a breath of fresh air because of that.
There is kind of a sense from Nintendo that like their games just aren't allowed to be challenging until you've like hit the credits, basically.
Yeah.
And then out of nowhere you unlock like the real game where you might start doing something challenging. To the point where like my personal like favorite of theirs, Super Mario 3D World, like you finish the main campaign and then there's just like fucking hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of like levels taking place in increasing different heights of floors in the sky that just keep like, you're like, oh, time for the bonus world. And it's like, how many fucking bonus worlds are they? Were they afraid to put any of this stuff in the main game? Like, why is this part so long? It's like genuinely strange at some point how far that stuff goes. And like Odyssey was like almost frictionless for huge amounts of its duration.
Yeah, I think that may actually be the conscious decision on them from them, but also,
I mean, I don't think they unconsciously make their games.
What I'm trying to say is that it's also the kind of design or kind of outcome that can come out of very weird or very unpolished quality assurance. If you get all of your quality assurance department saying, "Oh, this is tricky" or whatever, and they don't have like anybody standing back and being, "Oh no, that's on purpose," or whatever. Friction is a very difficult thing to get right on a big corporation, because software development is the opposite of friction development. Is the you want things to be as smooth as possible. Everything, it's tricky to get.
My entire vibe with Nintendo is that they've been like systematically removing friction from all of their games for a while now, and it's like part of it attaches to my criticism of Zelda games, but it also like it even like attaches to elements of like the direction that the Luigi's Mansion franchise goes in over time, and like a bunch of other things where it's just like these things like, or even Pikmin losing its time limit. Like there's like stuff that had a particular identity to it, and increasingly everything's kind of turning into like a sandbox that they make, and that like really culminated in like fucking the new Zelda Wisdom game being just a flat nothing. Just wander around and summon random shit, y'all. Who cares? And then you beat the game very quickly without putting any effort in.
I mean, I would say that's a pretty smart decision to go for. There must be some limit, right? Like you think of GTA or Breath of the Wild. There is some amount of player agency that really keeps a game in the cultural consciousness for a long time. But you need to figure out like just what are the edges that people don't want in their games to make them play it longer than they reasonably should. And I think I don't know, Nintendo isn't really, I guess they're not in a precarious position in terms of risk.
Yeah,
like,
they can afford.
Their IPs do they all the time, so it's not as if they gotta like oh shit, we only got one main seller, like what are we gonna do? They can kind of play around with a lot of their stuff and figure out, hey, how can we min-max all of these IPs? What is the most? And
it's so sad to think about.
Well, I think a lot of it comes from Iwata not being there too. I think there's a lot of, I would imagine there's a big difference in the way that the corporate side of Nintendo works versus the development side, which I think was different under Iwata's tenure. I think there's probably a lot of difference in the way that the suits of Nintendo interacted with the game development side of Nintendo. That probably isn't as divided as it should be. So...
But Astro Bot.
Regarding Astro Bot, actually, I'm playing right now. I'm playing Bloodborne, and I saw something in particularly in Elden Ring, but in looking back, I also saw it in Dark Souls 3, but not nearly as much. Dark Souls 3, I think, is a fantastic game that has very few barbed edges. But this criticism, the criticism that I'm gonna level at Bloodborne, I
preemptively bracing myself for whatever is about to come out of Colonel's mouth.
What I'm trying to say is, particularly on platformers, whether they're 3D or 2D, you can rely on how flashy things are. If you're trying to make just a platformer, it's not like an Ori and the Blind Forest or that kind of game. If it's really about, let's have some fun jumping around and doing interesting things with our character movement, you can rely on being flashy. And I think Sonic does that historically, has always done that, which is, fine, whatever, because you can, it's as I said, you can do an Ori and the Blind Forest, or you can do a Celeste, although Celeste is also flashy, but still. My point is, as games become, especially for 3D, as games became a little bit more, or a little bit easier to make in a way that's flashy, I think it's okay. I think developers started to be able to hide or not think as much of how unique their level design or their challenge design is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I really loved, absolutely adored in Demon Souls and in Dark Souls 1, but more in Demon Souls. Demon Souls does it better, which is the precisely that level design. That's sort of like every single corner you take is a new thing. It's like, oh, you're going to look at this new geometry that we have for you, and there's enemies in it, and you're going to have to cope with you can just run
navigate
in and do
this space and figure out how the space feels. Yep.
Yeah. And like, but every single world is like that. I was fully expecting Demon Souls to be to get worse later, but no, it is just consistently very interesting. Even the last level of Boletaria, which was the last bit that I did, was very cool, very interesting, and flashy as well a little bit, because it's a beautiful game. I think probably not as beautiful in a PS3 playing on the original version, but maybe I don't know, maybe back then maybe it was. I'm easily impressed with crappy 3D graphics because it's a little bit nostalgic for me. But the what happens particularly in because I'm now playing Bloodborne. What happens in Bloodborne is that now they have this in the PS4 they have this huge geometry budget, and they can just add all these statues and all these crates, and now they can hide enemies better. And I have my I don't like it very much that the game relies so much on jump scares, because it trains the player it compounds the issue. But I'll get to that. My point with Bloodborne is that they sort of abandoned the worry of making it an interesting place to navigate, and made it, oh, now you're gonna see this cool looking enemy in its habitat. You go into the sewers right away, and it's like, oh, this is it's interesting, but it's not. The game doesn't. It's just tunnels and tunnels and tunnels, to the point where I've always heard of the Chalice Dungeons being panned for just being tunnels after tunnels. But honestly, like, I'm early in the game, but I'm finding the Chalice Dungeons to be on par with the rest of the game. They're graphically speaking, they're obviously not as nice as the rest, because you go into the underground city, or it's not underground city, but the old town or whatever. You got the
So you're like just now getting to Bloodborne, right?
Yeah. And but the thing is, I think the level design took a huge step backwards in comparison to Dark Souls 2, and certainly to Bloodborne. Certainly to Demon Souls, because they rely on being flashy.
I think you are crazy, but I also think you're too early in the game to make this statement.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
It's
Bloodborne
definitely is full of that stuff. I was only like kind of like iffy on like the fucking forest a little bit, but overall like the levels like they're very soulsy, but also like the first zone, Yarnum, is extremely like complicated to navigate and has so much shit going on in it that it's like like the PSX remake is exclusively Yarnum because of how much there is going on level-wise there, that I'm like, I don't know if I can agree even the idea that that's not enough.
Yeah, Yarnum is one of the most fundamentally impressive levels that they've made since Boletaria Palace. Like I think the entire
opening of that game is fucking massive and non-linear and not hallways.
Then I think we disagree on or maybe I'm just not explaining myself, or I'm seeing something that I
maybe
can't.
I think I think
or maybe you're getting distracted by the spectacle and thinking that replaced stuff when it's just also there.
No, I'm looking. So the game is harder than Dark Souls 3. So I'm dying late in levels and having to replay the levels a bunch, which is fine. It's a console game. It's a little bit different than it's a different experience, or at least I'm taking it as a different experience. But I'm really I'm not having too much trouble exploring the first area, and I like the sort of now you open this shortcut, but it isn't really, or where to is the shortcuts, because like a halfway through the level shortcut, it's not like to a bonfire. That's kind of a cool thing to do, because some shortcuts are not really that useful, and others are obviously, it's just the gate that you had in front of the bonfire that was closed and now it's open, so that's a new area. And obviously the interconnection is interesting, but what I'm trying to say is I like the like, for example, in think of Boletaria in Demon Souls, you have the tight corridors, or you had the walkways, or you had the staircase going up, or this place where the big bridge with the dragon, and then you had these staircases that went down under the bridge, and like all of the level as just obviously it was an idea that you could understand by looking at the level. So you saw, oh, there's a bridge, there's a dragon burning it.
You essentially mean like the very video gamey, like, now we're doing this idea, sort of like approach.
Yeah.
Like, here's the room full of exploding barrels and the guy standing in the corner kind of stuff.
Well, like Boletaria 1.1 is like a really good way of describing this. I've always described Boletaria as like video game design 101, except just done really well. Even just thinking about the first run up, right? You walk forward and then one enemy is there. You fight him and you take him out, and then you walk forward and there's two enemies, but one of them aggroes onto you. So now you have to learn how to deal with two enemies, but now there's one of them coming to you, so you understand range. Then you go forward and there's three enemies and they break through the barricades
for
so
a
they
new
can jump
video
you.
essayist to make their like Mega Man sequelitis video about Boletaria 1.1.
And
but I
you
think
go
Boletaria whole the whole map is fantastic. Even to the point where there's a dragon blocking the path to the final boss, and you need to figure out how to get past the dragon. And as far as I understand it, you just need to run into the fire or past the fire.
You can do all sorts of things to get past it. Yeah.
Okay. That was my solution. That was this guy there burning, and I just ran past it, and he was just stood there.
This is a thing, though. This level design thing is like wireframe level design. Is something that exists in all of the Souls games. This is kind of FromSoft's strongest quality. When people talk about FromSoft, they're like, oh, the lore, oh, the boss fight design. But really the core of what makes Souls games as like crazy high level video games as they are is how everything is built around sort of this level design. Literally, Miyazaki started at FromSoft basically as a level designer. That's what the background of the core directorial team behind these games is. They're level designers by trade.
I think it shows.
Yeah, it does. It does show. And I mean,
it's what I've been
very
praising
simple
about the series from the beginning. And I'm like, no, that's what's important. It's not the fucking. It's hard. It's like, no.
I agree.
It's like it respects your time and is expressing ideas constantly, and it's like it's so playful and interactive that you're like you start memorizing it in real time because of it drills itself into your brain. The experience of playing these games.
Well, like quintessential level design 101 is like you go to an area, right? And there's like a left-hand hallway and a right-hand hallway. The left-hand hallway might dead end, but there's interesting challenges that go through it. And then it dead ends in like an item that incentivizes a reward for you to have explored this area, even though it terminates. Then you go back and go down the right way, and that's the critical path. Like that's just level design 101, right? Souls games are like that, but every single corridor is that in an abstract sense, right?
Yeah, but I'm thinking more about how maybe I'm gonna oversimplify my opinion. So this is not my full opinion, but there's so many tight corridors in Dark Souls 1 and Blood and Demon Souls. And those have a very specific character, and they specifically, you'd think that they allow you to funnel in enemies, but the hardest thing that it makes for you is visibility, as well as being able to, you need to commit sometimes. Otherwise, you can't kite enemies very well in tight corridors. And that's not, it's tight corridors aren't the only thing that does it, but this is the example, so I'm oversimplifying. So when you go into the Undead Burg and you have your first Silver Knight or whatever, Titanite Knight or those big, not the Titanite demon, the big.
You're talking about the Black Knights.
The Black Knights,
Yeah.
So you got that guy at the end of a tunnel that has an item in front of him, and this is such a simple idea. You don't need graphics to convey this. What I just said. There's a big knight that you've never seen before. It's like he looks scary. He's got a big sword, and he's got an item in front of him, and he's at the end of a corridor. It touches the player in such a fundamental primal level. It's not about, oh, there's this cool ass tree, and there's all the lore around this thing, and that's cool as well, but it doesn't exist, or it's not as easy to do if you have a hard limit on the amount of geometry you can draw. So you have to rely on stuff like that. You have to rely on that jump, that weird jump right after the Black Knight, that weird jump onto the top level of that tower where you go in and find the first secrets in Undead Burg. It's not really secrets, but you remember that because as a new player, you probably were trying to make that jump from the wrong place the first time around, and you just spent a bunch of time running up those stairs. That was my experience, and it comes from a sort of the geometry of the level is what the challenge is, and I'm not discounting the enemies, but it gels together. And where it comes to Bloodborne, it's streets, and there's carts blocking. And it's cool in the sense that it makes sense from a thematic standpoint, especially because I think the game has a very. I've always thought that I'm so maybe I'm biased and I'm seeing it more than it really is, but it's got a very Halloween feeling to it. So the jump scares and stuff like that kind of make thematic sense. But
Halloween Souls, finally.
Halloween. I mean, I'm playing it years after, and I wasn't. I didn't know about the game when it came out. I don't think I had played Dark Souls 1 when it came out even. So I'm very late to the party. But what I'm trying to say is that I think it's a game that shies away from. It's not shies away because I think it's not as interested in making the hard corridors or hard level challenges or level design challenges that Sans Fortress has, or that you think obviously
Bloodborne's
those are
easier?
No, he's not. I understand why you feel the way you do, but again, I think you were too early into the game to be making this generalization. I understand why you think it, but without sounding sanctimonious, by the way that you were speaking about this, I can also tell that you are missing a lot of things in the beginning area, and you aren't seeing the full picture, which is a theme that is literally boiled into the mechanics of Bloodborne. You are not seeing the full picture. You are not seeing the full picture of what the game is.
I know that multiple Let's Plays. I know.
Yeah, no, I understand. What I'm saying is, I don't think you're seeing the full picture from a play level, which is very much by design. One of the things that you mentioned was the game has a reliance on you're calling them jump scares. The level design terminology for this is
Monster
ambush encounters. So the Bloodborne uses a very different design language, visually and aesthetically, to the earlier Souls games, but it still plays with a lot of the same design functions. I will say overall, I think Bloodborne has probably the best overall level design in a Souls game other than Demon Souls. When people talk about level design, they often get distracted by art direction, visual aesthetic, or or things they're like, oh, the level design here is so good. I love how decayed it looks. And it's that's not level design. Level design is something that you do on graph paper.
Exactly. Yeah.
The level design of for example, or the world design of Dark Souls, for example, often takes a huge amount of priority because it's super in people's minds, because it's super interconnected, and that's all well and good. But the actual level design of Dark Souls is going to be is when you look at it again, with all the graphics turned off, in wireframe, where are the enemies placed? What are the levels actually asking you? What decisions are you making on a moment-to-moment basis? Bloodborne as a whole, as a space you navigate, and as a game design ecosystem that asks you questions, I would say is as complex as Demon Souls, if not more by the end. The thing is that, and this was a huge thing when Bloodborne came out, and it was something that we saw again with Elden Ring when Elden Ring came out, was people came into Bloodborne with a background in Souls games, and when this feels different, I don't know if I like it as much. It's not as good. It's not as good X, Y, and Z. Yeah. But I think the thing that people need to remember with these games is that no matter how much shared language they have, they are designed sort of in a vacuum. And what I mean by that is, every single time you go into these games, you need to relearn from scratch what the game is trying to communicate to you and what language it's using to communicate those ideas. So I understand why you feel the way you do, Colonel, because when you first get into Yharnam, you're thinking with your Dark Souls brain, and you're like, okay.
No, I'm not. No, I promise you. I maybe I don't want to invalidate the argument you're about to make, but I'm really like, the game feels more like a Ninja Gaiden kind of game.
Sure, yes. When I'm saying you're thinking with your Dark Souls brain, I don't mean like you know, in Dark Souls you can hold up a shield, and in Bloodborne you need to be aggressive. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying your brain as a linguistic device sees what is on screen and believes you are understanding what is there because you think you're speaking the same language as the game. But this game is slowly teaching you a new language, is what I'm telling you. So you have identified right now one of the common verbs in Bloodborne, which is crates and carts, right? But to you see this as it's an obstruction. There's going to be a monster behind it. Oh, I'm right. It's doing this so many times. How boring. I know what this game is doing. It's not as inventive as X, Y, and Z game. But you're in Bloodborne 101 right now. You have not graduated to Bloodborne 102, Bloodborne 201, Bloodborne 202. You're not speaking the fluent language of the game yet. And let me tell you, by the end of the game, when you see a cart, it does not always mean that an enemy is going to be behind it. And it also does not always mean that you're going to be walking through streets and only encountering those same ideas. It is doing the thing that Boletaria Palace 1-1 is doing, where it's like, you see one monster, now you see two. Now you're going to turn left, and there's a hole in the ground, but there's a monster on the right. How do you navigate this space? The game is doing that. It's just doing it at a slower pace because Bloodborne is a fucking massive video game. It is gigantically large. So I know that you've seen playthroughs and you have some idea of what this game becomes, but from a play perspective, I think your feelings on how the levels work will change very drastically as you actually have your hands on it. Because it's one thing to see a game and understand what its narrative is doing from a playthrough perspective that you're watching, and it's another to actually feel it. Bloodborne is very interesting, speaking about level design, because I actually think it's kind of the first game in the series where they went full in on combining a visual aesthetic with their wireframe level design. Almost everything in Bloodborne visually is there for a very specific reason, and there's so much detail in the environments that tells a story, but also is directly tied to the mechanical design of the areas you are in. And that is something that only gets more tangible as you play the game and are able to read what the environment is doing. So I don't think you are wrong to feel this weird friction that you're feeling right now with Bloodborne. I think it is by design, and it is something that every Bloodborne player feels at first, and then when they finish the game and go back to restart it, they have an even deeper appreciation of the early parts of that game because the level design is so strong. It's just doing more than our feeble little brains can comprehend at the start.
Yeah, I also think that just like the spammy monster closet jump scare stuff is actually like serving a very specific purpose in introducing the level design to a new audience, because it makes you afraid to move forward without checking
Yes.
all the time.
Yes.
And it's like
Yes.
that serves two purposes. One, because you can't play Bloodborne at the speed that people expect to play action games at, and if they haven't played Souls games before, because it's supposed to be a new IP and a Sony exclusive and blah blah blah, then they like need to be taught the pace at which you play from software games. So you need to be edging forward and like being careful and controlling how many enemies you aggro and whether or not they exist and so on, in a similar way to like trying to go through fucking dead mines in World of Warcraft in 2005 with a group and being like, if you aggro one extra bandit, we literally will all die, kind of like pacing. But there's also just the element of like blah blah blah. What was it? I lost my train of thought a little bit. There's also the fact that like you're trying to encourage people, like in making people look around and check all these different directions, you're also like creating a situation where like the level has an obvious-ish forward momentum direction because it's built in a city street. Like there's a intuitiveness to that concept. And so they're always iterating from there. Like on one hand, they'll have like the city street dead end in like a locked gate or this or that thing, and then you have to figure out how to go around that and so on. But before that, they've already conditioned you to look for side alleys and other things because enemies are surprising you from directions that you wouldn't initially consider because they seem like minor tributaries through the area, and you're like, so there's a layered teaching going on there to introduce the level design to you. And the approach to jump scares changes greatly over the course of the game, like whether or not the frequency it is in the first level.
Yeah. I definitely feel that it is meant to train the player, but I think it is a problem when you die, because you can never trust that you don't have enemies behind you if you're skipping enemies. When you die at the end of a level, you have to clear the level again. Like you obviously you don't if you're just an elite gamer.
But isn't this
that's just all their games
fall back
though.
into the yeah, this just falls
I don't
back
think
into like
so.
teaching you about a
you can
Souls
de-aggro
game.
you can de-aggro enemies easily in Dark Souls, and especially in Demon Souls.
What?
Oh yeah. You can.
I mean, Demon Souls is notable. Like people think Demon Souls is super hard because you have to do like the corpse runs in that game are the most difficult of any Souls game.
That's literally.
I think people will disagree with you on this. Yeah,
that's the breaking point on. That was part of the breaking point on me getting it through with Andrew, was the fact that you have to do the entire level every single time you die. And Demon Souls has the easiest content in out of any From Software game.
You can't,
but it has it's easily the most punishing From Software game. Because of the fact that when you die, you lose half your health bar, and then you have to replay the entire level every single time, minus whether or not you opened up a gate that was a shortcut somewhere, which itself becomes less of a thing as you go on sometimes after Boletaria. I think you might be at a line on that one. Like, I don't think that's an agreeable point.
Well, I'm coming at Demon Souls as an experienced Dark Souls player. Yeah. So, for example, I never used eyes of ever used the eyes of the ephemeral eyes or whatever, the blue gemstones that bring you back to full health. I just upped my health.
What?
I just upped my health stat. I don't need that.
You never got your body back, is what you're saying.
I never got my.
You never used humanity.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, no, I don't care if I die. Because the penalty, like, I enjoy the game so much. That's actually why one of the fundamental reasons why I love Dark Souls is I die. Great, I'm gonna play the same level again. And and if you don't like a certain enemy, or if you, I like that. I like it's not necessarily the corpse runs that I like, but like when
unhinged behavior.
I like for example, in the Tower of Latria, which you never played, Andrew. I think we were talking
probably not.
Last podcast.
God, what a fucking level!
Yeah, I love it. It's my favorite part of Demon Souls.
I loved it. But when you die,
we hit the armor spider, and that was the wall for Andrew.
Yeah,
he's got to get past one day.
When you die in the Tower of Latria because you're actually on level 3 instead of level 2, and you just fell down a hole that you didn't know was there. That happened to me a bunch of times. Corpse runs, I was like, okay, I don't really care about those 7,000 souls because I'm getting so many souls anyway from just redoing the level over and over again. I don't really care. But it's always a balancing act. Sometimes I went to great lengths to get my souls back because maybe whatever. I think the game rewards you or gives you so much more things after you died, like. You get healing items on certain areas, not Tower of Latria in particular. At least I never got any healing items from there. But in the first level, like there's knights that just always give you 2 full health
yes,
healing ones, and they're not particularly difficult to kill. They're hard to kill if you have other enemies attacking you, but the game gives you so much stuff on those corpse runs. And
we're gonna get into one of my hot takes here in a second about this. Continue,
but I don't think I think Bloodborne is the opposite on that. I think Bloodborne kind of trains you to, you went on a corpse run and you sort of half aborted it or whatever and used a bunch of items. Well, the souls that you got, buy healing items with them instead of saving them. Buy healing items because you're going to be on the below 20 healing items and you're going to want them because, surprise, all of a sudden there's a boss on this bridge. And so you're going to, you want to have 20 health or 20 healing items at all times, which is not the case for Demon Souls. In Demon Souls, oftentimes at least the way I played it is I don't care if there's a boss. I die, whatever. I come here again with I usually run with low healing items.
I mean, because they're already weird to compare because Bloodborne has the weird hybrid Estus flask setup where Demon Souls famously lets you carry infinite healing items, and it's
infinite healing items.
It's very interesting that you bring this up as a thing because Bloodborne is actually closest to Demon Souls in this regard. In that,
you think so?
And it's objectively true. So obviously you have consumable healing items in both Bloodborne and Demon Souls, but in a return to Demon Souls reward incentive design, Bloodborne has enemies that set drop healing items.
I didn't find them yet.
Yeah, there is a place in Yharnam very specifically that you can that people use as the farm for healing items because enemies there are set to drop items. And in fact, the way item drops work in Bloodborne is similar to the way it works in Demon Souls, not Dark Souls, where, for example, you need Quicksilver bullets, right, in order to shoot your gun.
Oh, yeah, I don't know what yeah, go ahead, sorry.
If you kill gun enemies before they fire at you, they will drop their bullets.
Yeah,
but if you kill them after they fire their bullets, their drop is lower.
I've not noticed that, but that's cool.
You can get guaranteed drops from enemies, so it affects how you play out those levels. Same with the healing items in the game. You are also able to very easily obtain healing items from enemies, and it incentivizes you to play better. So when you're saying, I'm running through all of these enemies, that's actually the opposite of what the game wants you to do. The game wants you to...
I'm not. In Elden, I'm getting all my games mixed up.
Bloodborne.
Right? I'm specifically not running past enemies, at least the vast majority of the time.
But you're saying
bite me in the ass. They will 100%. I get to the enemy that killed me, and they will be behind me.
Yes,
and
they will be behind you.
I've died twice to that. Once because that was the first time, and the second time it was an enemy that I hadn't even seen. It was just around the corner. All of a sudden, there's a big hammer coming at me, and it's like, what the fuck?
Well, what I was gonna say is, if you run past enemies, obviously they'll bite you. But the thing is the game wants you to fight them because that is how you increase your stock of items, and that's how you increase your overall resources. It isn't by trying to preserve them and by doing what you might do in a Demon Souls or I mean, not a Demon Souls, a Dark Souls, where it's like, I don't need to fight the corpses. I need my 15 Estus. I'll just run past these and I'll use these wide open spaces to avoid them, which is totally valid. That's a thing that those games allow you to do. In Bloodborne, it wants you to get better at the areas, to learn the enemy movesets, and it rewards you by doing this by actually actively giving you resources when you do it, rather than having this be a loss of resources. And while you are correct in understanding and identifying that Yharnam, the very first time you go through it, feels a little bit stricter and more linear in this regard, and it feels like you're just walking through some streets that have some carts and some ambush encounters in them, what it's really trying to enforce is you actually have to learn these layouts. You have to learn the amount of resources that you have to use and how much you'll get back from doing these fights. And that becomes part of the level math. And the cool thing about Bloodborne, especially, and this is where it innovates on Demon Souls, is that very quickly after Yharnam, it begins to take that math and design it into the levels by saying, okay, you're going to fight these 3 enemies. They might be harder than other enemies in the area, but they'll drop X amount of supplies. So when you kill them, you know you can expend 3 vials here because you'll get a grand total of 5 back. So if you expend 3, you'll still be net 2, which gets you to the boss room with 2 more heals than you had when you first started. Like, that is a huge part of the game design language of Bloodborne, and that's where Bloodborne...
I thought Demon's Souls did similar.
It did do that, but the thing is that where Demon's Souls kind of was a little bit less refined in this regard is that, as Keith was mentioning, in Demon's Souls you have a completely uncapped inventory basically. So once you farm up all of your items, the reward incentive becomes less valuable, whereas in Bloodborne that is never the case. And Bloodborne does other interesting things here with the resource economy in that you can sacrifice blood to get Quicksilver bullets. If you press up on the D-pad, you'll...
Oh, yeah. I've used that once by mistake. I was like, what the fuck? What happened?
Yeah.
I don't know what that's for.
The Quicksilver bullets are made of blood, so you can use your blood to replenish your bullets temporarily, which means that there is you get 5 bullets. So you can never run out of bullets. You're never locked out of them. But that obviously costs you health, right? So this creates an inverse relationship between the risks that you're able to take by parrying things and the amount of health you have, which means Quicksilver bullets scale with the amount of healing that you have, as well as their own currency, right? So the game then uses those resources and then plays with those things. So that's what I meant when I said you're going into this game and your Dark Souls brain is trying to read it, but Bloodborne is speaking a different language, right? What I'm saying is that the math in these games is slightly different, and it's asking different questions on a level design, just talking wireframe, not talking visuals level of like, what does an encounter mean and what does your rewards from that encounter mean on an encounter by encounter basis? Bloodborne takes this to the absolute logical extremity, especially by the time you get to the DLC, which is one of the strictest levels in terms of questions it asks a player and answers that are valid responses to it FromSoft has ever made. The Old Hunters is still maybe FromSoft's best singular design showcase. And I think most people would agree with me on that.
You talk about the DLC, and I'm realizing there's the DLC, and I don't know if I have that. I bought the PS4 greatest hits or whatever version of the game.
I don't know if the DLC comes with the greatest hits. I think that's just the base game, but the DLC is like $7 or something and on sale all the time, so you could probably just grab that as well.
The Sony greatest hits things are usually just discounts and nothing else changed.
Yeah. That's why I'm saying it may not actually have the DLC. I just for your reference of where I am, I am so I got taken into prison or whatever the name of it is called.
The Hypogean jail.
That can happen at so many different points in the story.
Yeah, that can happen. Literally just the enemy type that can do that to you is a generic enemy type in the game.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I got it after there's the blood creature of blood or whatever.
Blood-starved beast.
Yeah, blood-starved beast. I think it was right after that because somebody says, "Hey, go to this place," and I went there and got killed by this. Those enemies are so difficult to kill, and I'm actually not a big fan of them. But I'm getting better at them, and I'm enjoying
because it's supposed to capture you.
yeah,
that's the goal.
I'm getting better at killing them, but I'm enjoying the fact that I'm getting better.
But such a fucking wall for a lot of players early on. Like I spent like 2 weeks on that boss.
Yeah, I think
yes.
I think the bosses are overtuned. I didn't find the Blood-starved beast difficult, but I got like walled on there's an electrical one in the prison place, I think. Or
hear that, Keith? Get dunked on. It wasn't hard at all.
Well, he's returning to the game after playing like 6 other From Software games. This game came out after Dark Souls 2. We didn't even know what Dark Souls 3's fucked up shit was going to be yet.
Yeah, but I think the bosses have way too much health. It's so weird, and like I have a normal, like I'm putting everything into my weapon, so it's like I should be doing normal damage. Nope, you're gonna be here for a while. These things They do so much damage. And yeah, I'm doing the Chalice Dungeons because at least then I make progress. And
I like I like the Chalice Dungeons. I think they're flawed in that they're not as, obviously there's the bug that prevents them from generating the correct amount of seeds, which is a bummer. But I do think that the idea of the Chalice Dungeons of like, here's like a little roguelike, like a little souls randomly generated level using set level design is like, that can be fun. I think that's fine. And there's a lot of lore in them too, which is cool.
It feels like the if anything, specifically the Chalice Dungeons could kind of do with less friction as far as just being able to do them goes, and like being able to like get in and out of them and play them and like quickly do them with friends and stuff like that, and just let if it's going to be a more casual spammy experience, let me do it more casually.
Let me just do it easily
instead of just being okay, so you got to look up the guy that drops the thing in the overworld in this new game plus cycle to get this thing, and that'll give you the chalice, and that's one of the candidates. But you better get enough blood spasms to actually do the ritual though, and then you also your friend. And how do you invite your friend in here? Like, Jesus Christ, From Software. I thought this was just supposed to be the casual, repetitive part of the game. Why is this part actually harder to do than the base game, and I have to research it? This. Well, it's just like when I was playing my co-op playthrough with Bird, I was like, okay, let's maybe this will be the playthrough where I finally go through and beat the Chalice Dungeon and finally get to see the content I've never seen, because there's like a few optional bosses on the way that I've never seen before, and then the final boss is like a big lore boss, and that's like kind of a big deal, and it's kind of crazy. I've never fought them before, and genuinely, I just like capped out on trying to research how to even get there, because like the game doesn't surface at all how its hierarchy of Chalice Dungeons works. It's an invisible system of things, so you have to like look up on wikis and spreadsheets where the different things are that you need in the campaign to unlock the different parts of the Chalice Dungeons, and then also research where to farm or like which tiers of the Chalice Dungeon do you need to repeatedly farm to get the reagents that let you do the rituals, even when you have the right Cthulhu key, and you're like, man, this is pissing me off. Like, I don't I'm not even at the actual part that actually pisses people off, which is doing entire floors that one-shot you. Like, I'm not even there yet. I'm just trying to research how to unlock those floors, and it's just like, I'm just exhausted already, and I'm like, and immediately I'm like, oh, even if I do all this research, this is enough friction that I'm like, I'm never getting Bird through this. Bird's never gonna do his. Bird's not gonna do all the legwork on his end to also unlock the stuff. So I'm like, this is doomed. Like, I'm never gonna be able to do this as a friend thing either. I have to reboot this with a different person if I want to do a Chalice Dungeon run. I'm like, From Software. How far we've come that you're now making a hero shooter.
I'm very excited for Night Rain. We'll talk about that probably at a different time. But
did they announce a hero shooter? I saw it's multiplayer, but I didn't know it was a hero shooter.
It's not a hero shooter. I'm
just joking about how fundamentally different its approach must be to exist at all. Compared to fucking Chalice Dungeons.
It's gonna be janky though. I do not trust them to make a multiplayer game for all the amazing skills that they have.
How's the multiplayer in Armored Core?
Really good. Really good.
Shots fired, Colonel.
Yeah,
have a multiplayer game.
I think the Armored Core multiplayer is going to be the basis for this, because I've already spoken about it. They also said that the seamless co-op mod was directly influencing Night Rain.
I
think the multiplayer.
I would hate to have that.
On
my conscience.
I don't think that's terrifying. I think the seamless co-op mod made by people who are actively making the game is going to be better than the obviously modded experience.
It's not like they're inspired by the glitches.
Yeah.
Look at this.
I mean,
one thing that I'll say about I want to get this hot take out there, because people will disagree with me and it will breed engagement. Get trapped by my rhetoric, my facts and logic. I think that consumable healing items are good in Souls games, and the reason for
is that a hot take?
Yes, it's an extreme hot take. People think that Demon Souls is too easy because you can farm grass, and Bloodborne is bad because you have 20 vials.
Why don't you play with the game with a fucking banana then, you loser? Like
No
anybody
way,
can
that's
beat the
the
game
wrong
regularly with a
takeaway.
controller. Why aren't you standing out from the crowd? Why don't you just make it harder for yourself?
People are like,
Why is
well,
game-
here's the argument. Estus is important because it's a static number. When you die, your resources always revert to exactly what you have, so you know exactly what you have to work with. This is a static design element that you can design around. It creates a gameplay environment that allows you to learn at your own pace. This is 100% true. These people are not wrong. That is the greatest asset of Estus. That's why Estus kicks ass.
Sure.
This is not an argument against Estus. And in fact, I love the current Estus system in Elden Ring and in Dark Souls 3, where you allocate flasks to different resources. That rules. But I do not think Bloodborne is a worse game for having consumable healing with a hard cap limit, because you have to farm it, quote unquote, for the reasons that I mentioned before. Having consumable health items is a part of Bloodborne's resource economy and resource incentivization. And the way that these interact with the system is another variable that increases the complexity and interesting capability of the game and level design in these games. And I think one of the reasons why Demon's Souls level design is so good and why its reward incentives are so good is because finding a healing item is basically an objective upgrade to what you can do. It's like putting more gas in your tank. And while I think Elden Ring has done a fantastic job of creating a sort of middle ground on this, where you can refill your Estus pretty easily by exploring and fighting enemies specifically that refill it, I do think there is still a place in a Bloodborne 2 world, for example, where consumable healing vials that cap at a certain amount, maybe you can increase that amount. Maybe over time you can level that up or something. I think that is a direction I would like that game to go. And I think it would legitimately be not a downgrade, but a shame if Bloodborne 2 or whatever theoretical sequel to this game comes out just canned consumable healing items entirely. Now, I understand that a lot of players are going to go, but I hate it. I wish it was just Estus, so I don't need to farm. But once again, I think people who look at the games this way are not meeting the game where it is and not viewing the challenge for what it is. They're trying to work around the design of the game, and in their benefit and in their credit, the game allows them to by allowing farming and allowing replenishment from the
I was about to say
character box. But
like there's kind of a flaw there in that they make it so easy to farm them by just being like, run down the street, fight those 3 guys, 6 flasks, and you just like do that over and over again to get it back. That like,
but the thing is,
when you have limited
that
resources, like in a Resident Evil game, you have to go and you're like have to actually worry about how you're going to go forward and so on. Like, that's like a more interesting like choice to deal with. But given that you can just farm your stuff back whenever you run out in Bloodborne, I don't know if it necessarily accomplishes its goal of making that an interesting system, because it creates a system where it's just like, these are just Estus flasks. Until you randomly run out of your backlog of them, and then a switch flips, you just like switch over to farming mode. All right, I'm now playing the farming game for 10 minutes. So all right, back to the video game. And like the two things don't interact. They're oil and water for like a huge percentage of the players. And they're never punished for that. That's just a thing the game fully supports. And then at that point, I'm not sure if it's accomplishing
where I slightly disagree. And one, I think this is where it's very important that there is a cap on how many you can carry at a time. This matters because it creates
in Demon's Souls a cap.
Yeah, but the cap in Demon's Souls is 99 across 5 different items that heal you.
Yeah, like at some point the cap in Demon's Souls is actually the fact that you run out of fucking weight capacity to carry in the base game, but the remake removed that.
Yeah.
The remake removed your cap on how much you could carry.
With Bloodborne,
it removed the weight cap on your inventory in the remake.
Oh, I didn't know.
So you don't have the experience that every single Demon's Souls player has, which is that they get the tower shield and then it disappears because they can't pick it up.
I knew about that, and I was fastidiously like emptying out my inventory into the whatever dude is.
See,
and
my
I
even
knew
hotter
that
take is I think that inventory weight can be good and should be part of games, but I think that the implementation in original Demon Souls is just flawed because you can pick up so many things.
It's a game that spams dozens and dozens of pieces of physical gear at you and basically seems to expect you to collect them all, but then arbitrarily 6 to 8 hours into the experience, you're like, oh, you haven't been depositing them over there? Here's a random punishment of an item you can't pick up now. And then that's the one time it comes up, and then you're like, oh, I guess I was supposed to put stuff in the box all game. Like, that's not interesting
There
either.
should be an NPC at the beginning being like, I'll hold your items. You should deposit stuff you aren't using for me in case you can't carry something you need. Like, that one line of dialogue would fix it for me.
For it to mean anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what is an inventory even when your character walks around with like 500 helms, but then the 501st one is too heavy now? You're like, what?
So this is where my point with Bloodborne comes in is you can only hold 20. Realistically, you're gonna get hit at some point. So you're always going to be, from a pragmatic gameplay perspective, lobbying with your your ground level limit. You're always going to be at some benefit of picking up an item and that being valuable to you in your current life. Because there's very few points in that game where finding a blood vial isn't immediately tangibly helpful for you. Now, what you said about farming, yes, you're out of your blood vials, you can run back and farm a bunch of them for 10 minutes and then there's no punishment for you. That's not interesting. It's oil and water. However, I actually disagree, and I think this is a point where Bloodborne's design is actually super fucking elegant, and I think the complaints are a perfect argument for why it doesn't self-defeat. So people complain that they spend time farming. This is a choice that they made as a reflection of their style of gameplay, of their skill level. And I don't mean that in a derisive, like, get good way. I mean in the game is putting a challenge to them and they're not overcoming it, and they're taking hits and they're getting killed, and they're trying to run past enemies, and they're not killing the enemies in the level that give you healing items. So they're not maintaining the resource economy. So then they take 10 minutes out of their day or 20 minutes out of their day to go farm up 20 vials. And then they're like, ugh, I hate that I have to stop what I'm doing and go farm vials. Maybe this is friction and is negative reinforcement to make you learn your lesson and take things more slowly and figure out what you're doing and learn the enemy patterns and beat the enemies in the level that drop blood vials.
So right now, I didn't learn that lesson because in my first Chalice Dungeons were
Toaster
absolutely
says work harder, not smarter.
No, I think you should do both.
My Chalice Dungeons did not give me any healing items whatsoever, and doing like not 2 levels, but like a total of 5 levels was enough to bring like basically went through like 50 healing items. And the first time I died or whatever and didn't have 20, the 20 is even a different color, so you know it's special. The first time I died and it's not 20, I'm like, oh fuck. And then what the lesson I took away was every soul that I have, because I'll lose souls when I die or whatever. If I have 2,100 souls when I leave the hunter stream, I should have 0 because I should be buying healing items just in case, and that's what I'm doing, which I haven't done for too long. But so far, because I'm focusing on the Chalice Dungeons, that's keeping me on the 20 when I die. But it's still like at the back of my mind, it's a present thing, and I think people, like, anything that affects what you have at the back of your mind is more susceptible to be something that people complain about. And if it's not something that they have had nice experience with before, then maybe it's good, but it's not. It's going to be a bad time for them, even if they're actually it's not affecting them too much.
No, I think you are completely correct about that. I think that makes a lot of sense.
There's also just
I agree with you
like
as well
objective, reflexive solution to land on. That like there's no way of knowing like, oh, this is the way developers mean, and that's not the way developers mean. Like it's very easy to be like, well, I don't have enough resources.
You can only analyze
for the thing
what
I
is
gotta
there.
do. And most video games, like the Monster Hunters and whatnot, will be like, oh, you don't have what you need for this thing. Time to prepare for the thing, because preparing is a thing in games, and this is like expected behavior, and like.
Yeah.
If you're, for example, playing for an audience and they're watching, like, why wouldn't you do the basic cause and effect preparation for your problem you're having? So it's like, oh, you farm vials.
Sure.
That's preparing.
But I think that only reinforces the argument, which is, again, the game is a relationship. It exists in conversation, right? And so how much preparation are you willing to do? Are you going to sit there and grind for 300 hours and then complain about it? Or are you going to grind 40 vials, which takes 10 minutes?
Say, I've done my farming is just the only thing that can happen. Like it's the only, like when it comes to the placement of where the big difficulty walls happen and their proximity to the closest checkpoint. In many cases, it's just like, it's just he's right there. So you gotta gotta farm, because it's not like you're gonna like get your resources back on the way to him being right there. Like fucking Ludwig is so close to the closest shortcut to the closest checkpoint.
Yes, correct.
And it's like Ludwig's like the hardest boss or second hardest boss in the entire video game. And like there is no like Gascoigne I could see on some level, because I did like just go become the guy who goes to the couple of giants under that bridge and kills them over and over again.
Yeah, the house and the giants and
got
the
my shards,
werewolf bridge.
Got my blood back to then go fight Gascoigne over and over again, because I was stuck on him for a while. But like Ludwig is just like, he's just right there. Like you need to prepare for him. And similarly, like Maria is right after the previous boss. So there's no lead up there. Like repeatedly, the hardest bosses are often not at any kind of level that would build up your resources in any way. And so in one way or another, you're going to be farming, because leaving to play some other level in an organic way, like in more akin to what you're hinting at, would just be farming with extra steps. You're like going on a detour to like, I'm going to play some level over and over again, front to back for some reason, in a less efficient way to still farming resources, but in a way different than making 3 guys respawn to kill them over and over again. Like it's not really that different overall.
Well, so the thing that it is different, because the way that you experience the game is going to obviously be different, and that's a tangible, conscious choice that a player makes. But the thing that I was going to say here is that note that the bosses that you are mentioning here are relatively late game challenges where the game expects you to be speaking its language. They are skill checks, and like well after you should amass resources, which is where you are able to make the calls like, I'm going to go for an extra level, or I'm going to buy resources with souls that I already have. And I'm not saying that the game is never going to stop and have you grind or have you do preparation. I'm saying by the time you encounter these particular bosses, you are already participating in an economy of choice, right? And by participating in that, there's always going to be set locations you have to do or set preparation that you're going to participate in. That makes sense. But when you think, so this is where we get into the grand design map of a Souls game. People often ask, like, why do Souls DLCs always take place in the middle of the game? Part of the reason is to preserve the fact that there are many open avenues to go through. One of the big things about Elden Ring that people have always said is like,
where would DLC be that would not be like what's the word I'm looking for? Like jarring? It feels more natural when you put the DLC that includes extra stuff in the center, where you're like, oh, I'm just going to encounter this normally.
Well, the complaint often comes from the fact that people have already played the game, so they want to just like load their save and
jump in.
The sequel DLC launches immediately afterwards, or they want to be able to like launch the standalone DLC or something. Because
then you're not a Souls player. Like, what do you want? That's
you can just not. That's just like a self. That's the sentence eating itself at that point. That doesn't mean anything.
I guess, but it just doesn't. Most games have been like that. That's not like a unique to Souls thing either.
No,
a lot of DLC.
No, expansions.
The way that Dark Souls handles DLC is very unusual. Like,
it's extremely.
Deus Ex Human Revolution director's cut, I guess, did that.
Yeah, but that was also a complete re-release of a game. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm saying the Missing Link DLC was originally standalone.
Yes,
but
yes, was standalone.
Or I mean, not standalone. It was released separately from the re-release and was purchasable and was played there in that part of the game.
The one thing I want to say though is like, I'm gonna use this as a crazy example because I think this is an argument for like why certain things are overtuned and it might be overtuned in the Elden Ring DLC, and this is gonna be an example of me actually levying some criticism here. The Elden Ring DLC is probably the hardest part of all of Elden Ring. Pretty easily is the most difficult challenges in those games, but from a gameplay internal design perspective, the two requirements for getting into the Elden Ring DLC, spoilers in case people haven't played Shadow of the Erdtree somehow, it's one of the 5 games that came out this year. Shame on you if you haven't played it yet. You have to beat Radon and Moog in order to get into the DLC. You can access, like, Radon is a relatively early game boss. Moog is internally in the game's files a relatively end game boss. He gives the highest amount of souls for beating him, or runes.
It's souls. How dare you correct yourself?
It's the cap. And I think out of like the 23 bosses or whatever, like required or not required, but like important bosses in the game, he's like number 20 out of 23 or something. The only other bosses that are like later in the internal ordering are Millennia, Radigan, Elden Beast, I think, if I remember correctly. Could be a little bit wrong about the order there. But you can access Moog pretty early, right?
We did
like
in our playthrough.
We did it in our playthrough.
Don't fight Moog that early.
It was crazy.
Why?
So, but the thing is that the Elden Ring DLC, right, is you can go in pretty early into the game, and if you get stuck, you can go somewhere else. That's the thing people have always said about Elden Ring, is when you get stuck, you can go somewhere else. That makes it so different from every other Souls game.
So different.
But this is always,
no one's played Dark Souls 2.
Exactly. Well, no one's played any Souls game, because the thing is that has always been a thing
in comparison to
Souls game.
Demon's Souls, the game where you have to beat the tutorial level, then you have 5 competing worlds to progress through in any order.
And granted, those worlds are linear. Yes, you have to go through 1-1 before you can get to 1-2. But the thing is, you have 5 or 4 archstones or whatever, 5 archstones to go through that you can decide which.
It's also just more obviously linear. Every video game has that structure on some level, including every Souls game.
And
it's like a
Dark Souls, you start out and you have 3 different straight up paths you can go. And at any time, if you get stuck, you can backtrack and then go to a different path, right? The same thing exists in Bloodborne, to the point that lots of people don't realize how many bosses in Bloodborne are actually optional. Like, like people here, we were talking about it, I think earlier in this podcast, people talk about the Blood-Starved Beast. You don't have to fight the Blood-Starved Beast ever. It's not required.
You do. Do not be a coward. Kill every enemy.
They
will not respect you otherwise.
Granted, you don't know where you're going in Bloodborne, so you also don't know which stuff you need to fight.
You don't know where you're going, so that's fine.
You fight. You reach the church, and you can literally go left or right into 2 different zones instead of fighting the boss there. For example,
wait, you can go right on the church. I need to try that. I didn't realize.
Yes, exactly.
When you get to what's her name?
Vicar Amelia.
Oh, I don't think I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet.
Obviously, like when we played Dark Souls, we had that problem of like, oh, there's 3 different paths to go. How the hell would you know? Kind of deal. And that's fine. My problem is that if you know a boss exists, you must kill it. There's no excuse to not kill it. If you don't know the boss,
that is my stance on every video game.
I'm an even harder hardliner on this. If there is content in the game, you must do it. There is no such thing as a side quest. You do everything. It's there for you to interface with.
I would agree with that. Side quests become optional when I stop respecting a video game.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
They got real optional real fast and fucking Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning.
I
a game that does not deserve to
100%ed
exist.
fucking Final Fantasy 16 and Visions of Mana. Give back to me
That's
when you
not
play
healthy.
JRPG side quests.
That's
Shit is
not healthy.
insanity.
I'm
Not
too
even-
burnt on JRPGs to play their main quests.
Not even real
But-
fans of those series do that. Like that's crazy talk.
Yeah, I have a
I
mental
dodged
illness.
100 lightning bolts. I'm the
but
real
the,
gamer.
That only takes like 7 minutes. That's fine.
If you hate yourself,
The thing with Bloodborne though, and
stop
the thing
flexing your
okay,
Ritalin.
I don't take
Jesus.
Ritalin. I take Adderall. Thank you.
Yeah,
The
healthy stuff.
The thing with Bloodborne that I'll finally say about this is just that like people have always said Elden Ring's so different because you can go anywhere, it's an open world, but that has always been the case in all of these games. The only difference is like how open it is. Obviously, no one's saying that Elden Ring is as constrained as Bloodborne. Bloodborne gives you alternatives. It's just 1 or 2 or 3 at a time rather than 700 different shrines you can go to, right? And that is obviously a design difference in Elden Ring. But to get back to Colonel's very original point, which is that the game feels more constrained. Colonel's are, this idea that these games are Bloodborne's a little bit more constrained than the others.
Okay, maybe, yeah, if that is your takeaway, that wasn't my major point. I don't think I even agree with that.
You did have a meandering intro that cited 17 different video games before then complaining about monster closets, and that was like kind of where the whole
well,
rant
your argument
my
originally
complaint is that it's tunnels, but it's constrained.
But
It's constrained in the sense
But then you
that,
also said the old games were tunnels, and that was good, and I could not tell what you were going for at some point.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm trying. So it's tunnels in the sense of it's like hallways. It's just
sure.
Okay, there's this little battle arena that you're gonna fight this monster or this group of monsters, and now there's this battle arena that is the same thing with it, maybe different or maybe it's the same. It's whatever. It depends. Enemy variety so far seems. It's a little bit slow to change, but that's all right. The game is a different pace. But my biggest problem is that it's all just little battle arenas. It's not like you're never going to be fighting an enemy at the edge of or at the beginning anyway, at the beginning of the game that I played. At the edge of a precipice or maybe you don't have to navigate like
you're just saying there's less progressional incidental fights in the environment. I understand where you're getting at here, where you're saying that like every corridor seems to be designed around one little encounter and then you move on and it's another thing, right? I get that. When me saying constrained, I didn't mean that in a particular way. I just meant you are saying the game is not painting with a full palette of tools yet. It's only showing me a few different variations on a theme. That's what I'm saying with that. My point with this is Bloodborne will expand and start asking more complicated questions. The thing is that as we have just established from this nearly hour-long conversation about this, Bloodborne is defining the palette that it is painting with currently. And it's very interesting. I think one of the reasons why Bloodborne exists in people's memories so concretely is that it feels very familiar. It is painting a picture that looks like another picture we have seen, but with a completely different color palette, right? And with a completely different set of tools. Rather than the watercolor of Dark Souls or the acrylic of Demon Souls, it is painting with oil paints this time. And I think there is a very interesting design conversation happening, and that is what gets to kind of the coolest aspect of all of these FromSoft games. Every single FromSoft game exists in a vacuum to the rest of the games industry, but in conversation with itself and its legacy, which is really interesting. So I totally hear what you're saying about Bloodborne, and I don't think you're wrong for feeling the way that you do. But I think that you are coming at it from as if this is a place to make that judgment. I would encourage you to reconsider your perspective and start asking, why is the game setting these things up this way? What is it trying to say about this difference in design to previous games or previous experiences I've had? Because I think you'll, especially, and I'm just saying this like going forward because the game really opens up. I think with that in mind, the next parts of the game that you're going to get to are going to be even more satisfying as you have that brain expanding moment of like, oh, that's what it's doing. I get it. This is really like interesting to play from a just tangible perspective.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, because I asked myself why, and the answer, I personally, even with the games that I enjoy, I personally think I come at games with a critical mind.
Yep.
That is unfair to the game. No, seriously, I do. I think I approached Demon Souls with that perspective, even though I knew what Demon Souls was. Playing a game is just it's a different thing than watching Let's Plays. Let's Plays doesn't prepare you for critical analysis. Especially for like such gameplay intensive games. It's not like you can't have a proper opinion without experiencing it. And I approached Demon Souls and I didn't have high expectations. I was just, okay, here's the thing, this is what the game is going to do. Even with the storytelling, I didn't like, I had seen the cutscenes or whatever, but I didn't really I had always somebody experiencing it with me, which is watching a Let's Play. And Demon Souls was a game that absolutely surpassed every single one of my expectations. And what is just, I'm talking about the remake, but it is a fantastic game. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I think it's very easy. It's for its detriment, but that's fine. It's whatever. I personally think if they only made the bosses a little bit more agile, it would be the perfect amount of difficulty. When I asked that question about Bloodborne, maybe I came up with the wrong answer, and my wrong answer was precisely, I think they're relying on the fact that they can be showy and like these levels look great, these enemies look great, they're interesting, like the things they did, the thing they did with the crows, for example, wouldn't necessarily have worked on a PS3 or not as easily. Or at least not. I mean, it does in hindsight, but as a first, this new enemy, it wouldn't necessarily have worked the same way. And I think, it's a pretty game, and but I also think that Elden Ring is a pretty game, and I think its level design is good in the sort of legacy dungeons.
Yes,
that's what they're called. It's not as good, I don't think. Not as good as Demon Souls or as Dark Souls 2 or
I will straight up say I think Demon Souls has maybe the best level design of like just as a whole package. Like you could teach an entire course, like academic course on video game level design just using Demon Souls. Like it's that clean. With regards to I guess what I'm saying here with like think about this and like ask the question. I'm not trying to say like you're not asking the right questions or you're not getting the right answers. Like, I think the answers you come to make sense. My point is like, instead of, and I'm not even accusing you of doing this, but like, instead of stopping there and being like, oh, it must be because they're being showy. My next response is like, okay, if that is a valid answer to the question, why is the level design as constrained as it is currently? The end result is to be more showy. They're relying on the graphics more. The next question is, okay, what does relying on the graphics more do here? And what expectations is that setting up for the future of these levels to then have a conversation with me about, right? Like that is something that I think will really benefit because as I mentioned earlier, Bloodborne is really the first Soulsborne game where they leaned extremely hard into like all of the Souls games have good environmental storytelling, quote unquote, in the scare quote sense. But Bloodborne is like every single asset has truly an insane amount of detail. People are like still discovering things of like, oh, this random like doorway has like these 3 scratches on it. You wouldn't really notice it, but it's right there. And then when you turn the corner, oh, wow, there's an enemy that has exactly 3 claws. That's interesting. The level is signposting that there's going to be a thing right here, right? Like my point is that there is more questions to be asking and more conclusions to be drawn from these things. And you are just very early in the game so far. And the evolving conversation that you will be having with this game is going to go further than the answers that you are currently coming up with might seem at first glance. That is the point that I'm making.
I really like the environmental storytelling that it does. And maybe I'm spoiling myself, or maybe I'm experiencing the game as I know the story and I know some theories and stuff. But I'm trying to not think of them as I'm experiencing it for the first time. But I'm spoiling myself in the sense that I'm thinking of all of the H.P. Lovecraft influences that the game has, and I have them forefront in my mind because the game wears its heart on its sleeve in that regard, very obviously. And it's, I mean, Dark Souls does that as well, but Bloodborne is just on another level. So I think I'm letting myself be like, oh, I see where they're going, but I'm not really trying to draw conclusions with the stuff that I know already, because when I watched Let's Plays or what I read or when I watched some videos, I wasn't thinking of that. So I'm not like actually trying to come up with theories. Maybe the game is going to surprise me at the end and it's not actually, maybe they did a twist.
Yeah.
I haven't thought about that. I don't want to think about that
One
yet.
thing that I will say about Bloodborne, and this is sort of a curse of just video games in general, but Bloodborne, truly nothing in my life, I don't think, will ever compare to my first time playing Bloodborne, because the black box that surrounded that game when it first came out was so concrete. No one knew what that game was. And I'm not saying that like the marketing was misleading or anything, but the mystery of what Bloodborne was truly was preserved until people actually finished the game. And like, I got that game before Street Date broke. Like, someone sold me a copy from a local Walmart before the release date of that game. So I got it like 2 weeks early. And I played it before the online features were even activated. So I went in completely blind before walkthroughs existed, before I could look at a wiki. And like, seeing what that game was and what its story was doing, like, you're like, Colonel, you're mentioning like, oh, I'm seeing the H.P. Lovecraft influence here. But you also, because you've seen playthroughs, know where some of the game goes.
Yeah.
I like literally no one saw the Lovecraft influence in Bloodborne on day one, because as you said earlier in this podcast, oh, this game is like way more Halloween flavored than other games. Everyone who bought Bloodborne went, this is vampires and werewolves. This is the vampires and werewolves game. This is Van Helsing Souls.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. I see that. So that's cool.
That's cool. Yeah. So like, again, when I was talking about like, you're not like
stuff, it is absolutely. I can see that.
Yeah. You're even though you are correct.
Going in, it's supposed to genuinely like built into the insight system and everything. Like, it's literally part of what it's building up for, is that like, like the unveiling.
Like the cosmic horror of Bloodborne is now relatively well known, but at the time was an insane twist.
Yeah.
I think,
obviously when you encounter your first tentacled thing somewhere, that's like a surprise that's at odds with everything else you've seen so far.
Yeah.
I think so just to clarify then, I think I probably it's just because it's at the back of my mind. Yeah, and I've seen, I can see like, it's a hindsight kind of, obviously it's wearing a sleeve. But on the other hand, it's the old blood, it's the old ones. Like, the language is all there, and it's the same reason why the freaking Game of Thrones, a Song of Ice and Fire, is inspired, or is sort of a Lovecraftian kind of setting, is because it takes those, the names are there, and you start drawing comparisons, and when they say the old gods and all that, you can start drawing comparisons, and it's all there, blood sacrifice and all that. So obviously when you see interviews, the authors mention we're big fans. So but it is on a hindsight. I can see where they're coming from. People
It will
see it
like,
as
and
this.
again, I'm not saying like the things that you're experiencing are like not right or whatever. Like you're coming in with your predisposed knowledge. Everyone has that, and like there is no way to preserve a 100% sincere experience. And I don't even think. Like I'm on record saying I don't think spoilers ruin things. I think Bloodborne is still good even if you know the spoilers ahead of time.
100%.
But my point is, it's going to influence the way that you perceive the game. So you currently are like going through these early streets being like, every single encounter is like a little arena fight as you're going through corridors, and it's crates, and there's going to be a wolf behind the crates, and I'm going to fight the wolf, and there's no incidental fights, and there's no surprises for me, blah blah blah, right?
I mean, the first time around there's some surprises.
Sure, but I'm saying from like an intellectual perspective, the surprise is a thing jumped out at me, right? Mm-hmm. Even that is in service to how the rest of the game's like knowledge progression works, because you go into the game going, okay, well, I'm in yet another hallway with yet another set of boxes. There's going to be a wolf behind it. And then you walk behind there and you see, oh, there's no wolf behind there. It's just an item. And then you pick up an item, and the item is called Madman's Knowledge. And you look at it, and the description is, making contact with eldritch wisdom is a blessing, even if it drives one mad. And then you go,
like,
wait a minute. Is this game doing a cosmic horror? What?
It is, yes.
And then that is itself a discovery that is more chilling than the ambush encounter the game has taught you to expect. And so
I think it layers more, obviously, because the next time you hear somebody say, "This is all your fault," you're like, "Wait a minute."
Yes, exactly. But the thing is that
who's the hunter here?
Yeah. What I'm saying though is like, I think you get that perspective, but your experience with Bloodborne so far is coming from a place of knowing this thing. Whereas if you went in 100% blind, or if this was your first time, or again, as Keith was saying, Bloodborne is a new IP. There were a lot of people that played Bloodborne that had never played a Souls game before. They like, a lot of the design is catered around this idea of you not knowing what's going to happen there. So these organic, or these constructed level design things play into the organic acquisition of knowledge in a way that you don't necessarily have. So it feels a little bit flatter to you in a way that Demon Souls didn't, because Demon Souls is a much more mechanical experience than Bloodborne's more mystery oriented progression, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I think so. I'm very I know a lot. Well, not a lot. I'm not a mythos nerd. What's the buff? I suppose I'm not a like a Lovecraft mythos buff. But I know a lot about the Lovecraftian mythos, and I think particularly because it was like 3 years ago. I was trying to sort of distill what I like about it and why I find it interesting. And why it's scary, why it's interesting. And in the process, I managed to change my appreciation for it, not necessarily for the better, but just I like it for different reasons now because I studied it. But I think what I liked about studying Lovecraft is why people like it and what people pay attention to. And so right now, if I didn't know anything about Bloodborne, I think I would have seen, because I am intimately familiar with Lovecraft. I would have seen the references, and like you see even the references in Demon Souls when that guy shows up all dressed in yellow. That's the King in Yellow as a reference, and because the parallels are sort of there. Obviously, if you want to see them, if you they don't, it doesn't really spoil anything if you don't see them. It's still in the game. But it's an homage, as it were.
One of the things I would say about Bloodborne in this regard, though, is like, I'm similar to you. Like, I've read basically all of Lovecraft's stuff. Like, I wouldn't say I'm a super fan, but I'm relatively well knowledgeable about these things. I had, at the time Bloodborne came out, I'd always noticed and liked the cursory eldritch cosmic horror of the Souls series in Demon Souls, in Dark Souls. But again, going into Bloodborne, your expectations are going to be slightly different. And so I saw these references and I was like, oh, that's cute. They're doing their like, ooh, spooky old god stuff, but it's probably going to be a big werewolf. And then again, as you go through the levels and you encounter Madman's Knowledge, Kin Cold Blood, like things like this, you're like, wait a minute, is it actually doing this? And then it really does. And that is, I think, the point of no return on the themes of Bloodborne and on the understanding of its aesthetic and its world, is seeing where it actually commits to things that have only been cursory in other games. And that even goes as far as like Elden Ring. We just went through this with Elden Ring, where I played all of the base game, and I've known for 2 years now that the fingers were fucking aliens. It was so obvious. It's anyone who's ever read Lovecraft understands that Bloodborne is a cosmic horror story. But there's a video that Zuli the Witch put out today, 2 hours ago, titled like, "The Fingers, they were aliens the whole time." And people in the comments are like, "Oh my God, what a revelation." And it's like, yeah,
the game almost says it.
The DLC spells it out, yes. And I'm not saying Zuli didn't get this. I'm saying people are responding to it like this. But that's what I'm saying, is that you have to realize that these things are in conversation to a larger whole. And so with Bloodborne, us going into it with Lovecraft eyes, we can see the Lovecraft influence, but it is the actual the commitment to eldritch horror in Bloodborne that makes it different than just being a small homage, or makes it like this is a noted change from the other games and is an aesthetic choice that's very different from them on a very design level, which I think is cool.
I think in particular for the Elden Ring, the Lovecraft influence doesn't come through necessarily on the story, though. It's very obvious when you get to see the king, or whatever, the Hyperion, under spoilers, I suppose, under the tree, and just, I think maybe it's just the giants. Anything that's like giants where it should be normal people, it feels very alien. And so and then a meteor comes from the sky, and it's like, oh yeah, that's the
you're literally at war with aliens for half the game. you know, like it's interesting in that regard. Yeah, I think again, and there's more sci-fi influence here, and like Book of the New Sun and its fantasy language that actually is hiding like a sci-fi setting, stuff like that has influenced all of these games. I think in Elden Ring they kind of focus on the far cosmology of it a little bit more, but my long story short here is that Bloodborne is really committing to something that they don't really do, which is like a ground level eldritch horror experience. And that took a lot of people by surprise when it came out. And because, again, it's like missing the forest for the trees. Everything about Bloodborne was vampires and werewolves and gothic horror and Van Helsing. And like, yeah, maybe they're doing a Lovecraft reference here or there, but it's not going to be the Lovecraft game. And then it turns out Bloodborne is, in fact, the greatest Lovecraft game there is. And it was just a very big change from what people were expecting, I think, at the time. And that's kind of lost on people now because Bloodborne has entered the discourse as a cosmic horror game.
Yeah, I think to the point where even the vampire association is not really that common. Like, it is there. Yeah. Like, in hindsight, it's obvious where it is, but that's not what the game is about. I don't think there's vampires in that game.
There's not. But again, people, because it's blood, and Van Helsing sounding, and so people see it as
silver
that.
Bullets and stuff like that. Yeah, yes. Definitely.
I don't know anything about Bloodborne, and I probably still won't.
You haven't played Bloodborne?
No. It's like exclusive to a PlayStation console. I'm not gonna buy it. Yeah, like you can't get me to buy a PlayStation. You cannot lie to me. It's not better than a PC. Like, why?
It is not better. No. And you need to pay for internet, and like you can't connect your Bluetooth audio device or whatever, and unless it's like this weird list of PS3 or PS5 compatible hardware. That's bullshit.
That's too much. Like, I don't care.
Really
there's not a single game on this planet I care enough about to do that. But
there's
like, if it ever came to PC,
that's what happened.
More than
to
happy
me.
to play it. That's fine.
And for me, it was multiple games. There was the Last of Us and the Bloodborne and Demon Souls and
TLU2 Part 2 remaster. People said was useless. I said it's so that they can do a PC port, and it turns out Toaster was right. It's coming out on PC in like 2 months.
Wow, look at that!
Really?
I could just not buy a PlayStation, and now I could just get it on the PC. Why would I bother? Like,
They're
what am I?
console games. I bought.
Yeah,
I think they're. I haven't played them yet, but I can see the experience is different when you play it on a console. Well, unless you're playing it on your.
I'm just so amused about the
really
TLOU 2, which does not isn't any shorter than just saying The Last of Us 2.
Yeah.
I had to like sit there and think for a moment what he was saying. I'm like, these are all one syllable words. What are we doing?
So I don't know. I mean, I kind of tuned out a lot of this because I don't really the lore of Souls games isn't really well the lore of Souls games isn't like the appeal to me in those games. I don't really care about what they're saying, and I don't even notice most of the story that happens in any Souls game.
It's easy to play them and not pay attention.
But it's not an indictment on the game. It's not saying that the stories are boring or anything like that. It's just it's not what I'm there for. I am there to become the greatest threat that world has ever seen. That's like my entire goal. And so it's fun to watch like giant enemies being like, "Fool, how dare you?" And then you just knock them down. You're like, "Okay, bye." And you just keep moving on. And people are like, "I'm sorry, did you kill the guy who's been holding the stars back? What the fuck do you mean? Like that guy's been doing that for 100 years." Like, yeah, whatever, fuck that guy. You just keep running. Like it's fun. But
for me, the struggle is just like every one of these games, like because it's hard to actually internalize the story, it mostly just becomes like theming and texture.
Yeah.
And it makes the boss fights seem really cool when I walk in and there's two brothers and one's weak and one's strong and what's going on here? And I'm like, but like the surrounding understanding doesn't like hold very well. So there is a lot of like, as the meme goes, like, Zanzibar, I'm sorry, as you walk into a chamber. And then I'm like, yeah. That's just a joke about it's like the Glup Shido joke of Elden Ring and Dark Souls and so on. It's just like the sort of vibe that boss fights have as you walk in and someone yells a name that you don't understand and it seems really important and gothic music plays and you're like, oh my god, this is so hype. But most players don't really get what's going on, which is why Vati has a whole job.
And the fact
to the point where like in the most recent expansion of Elden Ring, people were like, oh my, they did the Zanzibar thing, because there was a boss that like almost verbatim did the meme essentially. I'm trying to remember who it was now, but it was like at the moment it was almost 1-to-1 to like what people joke these games feel like sometimes. Although for me the ultimate Zanzibar meme is the fucking guy that yells Ocelot in Dark Souls 3.
Yeah.
He's like, because he's holding an invisible baby,
or
maybe isn't holding a baby, but you hear baby.
He's not holding a baby, yeah.
But he thinks there's a baby at the very least, and he's blind and fighting you, and he keeps talking about Ocelot, and that's like, for me, that is the Zanzibar meme incarnate.
Yeah,
So
I mean, again, it's the stuff you could probably find by just being more studious about the environment. Like Toaster said, like you can see the claw marks on the door. That is an indicator. Like I can see claw marks and my instinct is like, oh shit, I'm gonna have to fight like a beast monster. But like I just don't put
I don't think he's saying that the 3 claw marks has deep lore implications. I said it was very little. It's that guy over there.
I just meant that
detailed.
That's how Souls games are though. Souls games put a lot of their story in both the environment and in things that you find. Like it's in items, it's in characters, it's in walls, it's everywhere. The whole fucking
information
game
is a resource and it's tied to everything.
Yeah. It's but that's like but that depends on your. So when you're talking about like, oh, people just assume it's the werewolf game. It's like, well, yeah, but a lot of people don't put that together. Some people just genuinely don't figure that stuff out. So when there is the surprise of being like, what the fuck is that Cthulhu? Who am I fighting here? Like, it doesn't. But I think it works either way.
Like,
I think people
still.
I think people still get an enjoyment either way though, which I think is a real stunning part. Is that even if you're not balls to the wall invested in this story, you are still going to be like, what the fuck? What happened just now? What am I fighting? This is terrifying. Like, you still are engaged in having a good time, even without the context necessary to really like feel fear or appreciation for the things happening. And
I was slightly disappointed that Bloodborne turned out to be that cosmic horror-y, purely because of the fact that on a wider media perspective, like sort of thing, like I like werewolves, and werewolves are an extremely underrepresented thing in most media. Like, you don't get werewolf movies or werewolf games
except
all that
in
often.
Souls games.
And
what do you mean?
They show up very briefly, or they're one enemy, or I'm promised werewolves and the ability to turn into a werewolf by the developer of Fable in an issue of Game Informer, and then I play the game and I don't get to be a werewolf in the game. Like, it's like another lie, and I'm personally hurt by Peter Molyneux. And so having the werewolf game turn into a Lovecraft game, when I was literally like, oh, this is literally the decade where I play another Lovecraft game every 2 months. I was a little disappointed from that perspective, because I had played so many games that are first-person Lovecraft games with columnar jointing, where you end up in a space full of vaguely tentacly stone carvings, and then you have to run away from a guy that you can't hurt.
Those games don't do it right.
No, they don't. But I'm just saying, I was
preemptively
already kind of tired of Lovecraft, so I was a little disappointed when the werewolf game was a secret Lovecraft game. I'm like, no, please, I need this. Let me have.
On the other
game.
hand, for me, I was like, I get to have both, and then I was like euphoric for 2 weeks. I literally felt like a god, where I was like, the vampire werewolf game is also the greatest Eldritch horror game of all time. It's made specifically for me.
Yeah, it is still like the best werewolf game ever made, basically, because well, that's the
it does have werewolf.
Being the target demographic for something. What is it?
Blood Moon is a hoot, and I'm hurt that you put Bloodborne over Blood Moon.
What?
Blood Moon.
The Morrowind expansion.
Yeah, I was like, the Morrowind expansion. What are you talking about?
Awkward, like, Lupin twink and slap people to death for the rest of the game.
And growl, and nobody can see you, otherwise everybody knows you're a werewolf.
I played Morrowind mostly as a werewolf, and you just turn into a guy that slaps people gooder, because the combat and game feel of those things is just so, like, paper thin that it's like, my one attack has turned into this one attack for the rest of the game.
You can jump.
I love Elden Ring. I love Elder Scrolls.
No, it's not Elder Scrolls. It's Morrowind. We need to.
They never got better.
What do you mean? It is Elder Scrolls.
Skyrim and Oblivion did not get more interesting or anything in combat. They still just
got worse.
Oh, you're a melee character. Here's your melee swing. Use that. Sometimes you can charge it up. Do you feel better doing that?
I'm not defending. I'm not saying. I'm saying I think Morrowind is better than Skyrim in terms of combat.
I honestly don't.
Sure, but I don't know. I don't think it makes it not.
They all seem to do nothing with their combat. I don't know how you can rate them.
Because it's abstract, and in Morrowind, you're like, you either hit or you don't. Right? It's that simple, straightforward combat. But it isn't a thing that it's not like you can commit. Oh, maybe I'm not hitting this enemy as much, but maybe I hit it and I do enough damage to kill it or whatever. It's a traditional hit and miss combat. But I think the moment you add the always hit mechanic, and the only thing that changes is the damage, it's and in a game where the difficulty setting is what it just changes the damage and the health, it's self-defeating. And I don't like the combat system in Skyrim and Oblivion, and that's why everybody plays a stealth archer, is because the combat system sucks, and you might as well just go stealth and do a lot of damage.
Well, yeah, because doing a stealth archer attack is the only moment in a more recent Elder Scrolls games where you feel like your attacks hit something. You feel the impact of like that big bolt making the fucker ragdoll in the top corner of the screen. Says 6 times damage for crouching, and you're like, oh
and
my
it's
god!
A consequence.
And you play a melee guy, you go slap. You just like you're flopping a pool toy around, and there's like almost no feedback that it's even landing hits, and you watch their health chip down 5% per hit. You're like, these games are terrible. How did this get popular? How, they don't even feel good to play on a basic level, so I don't understand why they appeal.
I really do think it's because most people just don't engage with the combat. They just play. They play for the fantasy, and they play for stealth archery, because it's not a matter of people like games for different reasons and then just ignore the rest.
People don't like games. Don't lie.
No, I'm
People
trying
play
to
games begrudgingly because they don't want to think about reality. But we don't like games.
Yeah,
people are not games journalists. Basically, they're big fans of Skyrim.
It's fine.
And that's what matters, and that's fine. But I do think that the next Elder Scrolls game cannot have Skyrim level combat because,
well, too bad. It's Skyrim 2. You should have not thought about that.
My final point about Bloodborne that I sat on is on the fucking Blood Vials discussion, because I'm never over it.
Oh yeah,
it's just the fact that I'm like, okay, so if it's a resource game early on, and it's trying to get you to interact with its replenishing systems, but it like struggles because it gets people to just start farming. But then people, like as you point out, that people then just opt out of the system by just amassing them to the point they don't matter. I'm like, isn't that also defeating the point? Doesn't that also make it not really a system?
I think
because that's exactly my experience. Is I definitely do, just like after the first few levels, I'm like, and now to just spend instead of buying a level right now, just blood vials, just a massive pile of them, and
oh my god,
I literally just never run out of blood vials for the rest of the game after doing one big purchase, probably.
That seems wild.
So what I will say about this, I'll try not to go on super long about it, but I think to summarize my kind of thought on this is, one of the reasons that sets Souls games apart from other games is that you have a very tangible choice, result, cause, and effect experience in a game, in all of the Souls games. Whatever the player chooses to do is valid and is part of the flavor, texture, and layout of their playthrough, right? So I do not think it is a failure or a problem with a game when a player can circumvent a system or make choices that ease burdens or allow them to work past an otherwise economy in the game. The thing that I think that sets Souls apart from other games is that there is a very direct relationship between the effort that you put into a thing and the payoff of that thing. So, for example, people don't like to grind blood vials. They get irritated that they have to do it. They work up a bunch of vials, and then they never change their play experience. They never change the way that they go through the game. So they're still ramming through vials. They're still fighting bosses and just like using all 20 just to die and then have to go farm, right? I think that the game creates an environment where it says it kind of wants you to, all right, instead of using all my vials to fight the boss, I'm just not going to heal this time, and I'm going to fight it until I learn how to no-hit the first phase or whatever, right? Like things like that. Those are valid playstyles that the game wants to encourage, and I think it does encourage that, but it never closes the door behind you on allowing you to change your style and decide, I want to spend 8 hours farming to get 99 vials so I can just try to eke by, because I'm brain fogged and fatigued with this boss and just don't want to actually have to learn this or don't want to have to do this. I want to just be able to do it with 20 vials, right? That's fine. The thing is that comes at a cost, right? There is a cost of engagement with Bloodborne systems and with all of the Souls game systems of, all right, well, if you want to play this way, you do have to spend 8 hours farming. You can circumvent the system, but that's your choice to do this. Even if you are playing really well, and even if you are, at a Ludwig or at a Maria where there is no level between here in the fight and you think that you now need to farm 999 vials, that came as a direct consequence of how you are playing and how you're trying to move forward. And maybe you now are forced into a corner and you have to farm vials in order to have enough to try to get through this boss. But the play space is still open. The game has not changed anything for you. There's no one completely perfect route, critical route through the game that defeats all other, like one unifying strategy that gets through everything. A game like, for example, Wukong struggles in this regard because, for example, grinding up to level 340 or whatever is just makes your character the best character that they can be. There's no way around it. It just unlocks all your skills. Getting more mind cores and getting your levels up is just objectively the correct thing to do. You know, using that as just a really loaded example because it's a like poorly balanced game that's poorly designed and not very well made. Like all of these examples here, there is a central unifying playstyle. Pillar stance is going to be inherently weaker than damage stance, which is inherently like thrust stance is always going to be safer than other things. Like there are unifying metas to those games. Bloodborne doesn't necessarily have that in the same way because while there are things that are strategies or are playstyles that are more incentivized and are better overall from a top-down level, the actual play experience is viable for pretty much any way you want to play, and it leaves those doors open for the player to reward whatever they feel like they want to do. So calling back to Skyrim as an example, right? Skyrim, everyone plays Stealth Archer because it is just objectively the best, and every character can become the Ubermensch who can do every single thing. And when they do that, Stealth Archer is still the best way to play, no matter what, because of all the reasons listed, right? In Bloodborne, all of this equals out to, well, actually, for the resultant payoff, like, you could just grind to level 900 or 738 or whatever, get 99 in every stat and 999 blood vials. But that comes at a cost. By committing to doing that, you are committing to a grind. It takes a lot of time. That's a cost that you have chosen to do. And there were other avenues of beating this, like getting mastery. People beat this game at level 1, and it doesn't really take as long as whatever you would do, right? Whatever the grind would be or whatever. There are other avenues of play that are equally as valid and equally as powerful with roughly the same amount of skill, time, and effort invested. So that's where I think Bloodborne doesn't fail, or like Souls games in general don't fail, even though you can circumvent certain systems, whereas other games, circumventing systems is often the best way to play and the only way to play. So that's what I think makes it different in Bloodborne's case.
Mm-hmm. Also, I would like to shout out Takarius. I'm not actually sure how their name is. It's a small YouTube channel that has a video specifically about why people can't stop playing Stealth Archery in Skyrim. And if you're listening, by the way, out there in the open wide web, the podcast isn't just mine, but you're welcome to join us.
Oh, I've seen this video. I just opened it and my autoplay was like 26 minutes in. So I watched this video. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you don't know it by the fact that you liked it already on the like button.
I wasn't looking at it, but I do have it set as liked. Yes.
That's how I tell.
Calling out Toaster.
Yeah, very good channel. But the thing is, particularly because of the evolution of combat in RPGs, it was all right for Skyrim and for Oblivion to have crappy combat. I think it was all right. I think it was fine. That's why people can play those games and like it and whatever.
What?
But it's not all right anymore. It's, you know what I'm saying? It's just, you can, like, the audiences are at a different level now, and that's fine as well. But you cannot just have a AAA game with a AAA action game.
Colonel wants change, and he wants it now. It's the revolution. That's what we're going to end this podcast
Bethesda
on.
should simply stop making video games. Bye.
That'd be great. Oh.